From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. With about a month to go until the Alabama Legislature's regular session, there is continued talk about what to do with the second round of American Rescue Plan Act funds. The state has another $1.1 billion from the federal government that must be allocated by 2024 and spent by 2026. Governor Kay Ivey and the legislature decided to spend the first round of ARPA funds mostly on water and sewer infrastructure, rural broadband internet, shoring up hospitals and nursing homes, and new prisons. This week, hospitals from around the state urged the governor and lawmakers to use some of the funds to help facilities recover financially from the pandemic. A new report from the Alabama Hospital Association shows that 50% of hospitals in the state operate in the red. Officials said some are in danger of closing if they can't get financial help.
So unfortunately, across the state of Alabama, what we find is that the situation is quite dire. Unfortunately, Alabama has fared worse than the country as a whole due to many of these external challenges that hospitals are facing. And while hospital leaders put care of the patients and community at the paramount amongst all of this, you will note here the level of financial impact that the pandemic and these external headwinds have had on hospitals.
I think this report, perhaps better than anything else I've seen, answers the question. You know, as you've seen, we received federal support through CARES Act dollars and other federal funding. If it had not been for that federal funding, we probably would have fewer hospitals today, number one, but our net over 3 years would have been negative $2.4 billion. Even with that federal funding, and that's the important point, even with that federal funding, Alabama hospitals lost $1.5 billion over 3 years. There isn't enough ARPA funds out there to plug the hole and make the hospitals whole to the pre-pandemic levels. But what we desperately need is a significant infusion of ARPA funds, enough to serve as a bridge till we can address some of the other fundamental challenges in the reimbursement system.
Members of the Legislative Contract Review Committee this week raised concerns about the state prison system's new inmate health care contract. The Alabama Department of Corrections has contracted with YesCare for providing medical care to the state's more than 26,000 inmates. Among the issues raised was the fact that Bill Lunsford, an attorney representing the department in a healthcare lawsuit, was named to the advisory board of the company who won the contract. Lunsford would come off that board and the bid was redone, but State Representative Chris England and others said the situation had the appearance of a conflict of interest. He had a terse exchange with Mary Coleman Roberts, the general counsel at Corrections.
Our attorney, Lunsford, John Lunsford, the one we're paying to represent us in court, is on the board of YesCare. Is that correct?
He is not currently on the board, no.
But he was on the first go-around.
He was on an advisory board only. That's my understanding. He had nothing to do with this, their proposal and this contract. He was off the board at the time the second RFP. Well, I don't know that he was ever actually on the board. An offer was made for him to be on the board. Let me put it that way. I don't know that he was the board ever convened or had conducted any business, but there was an offer extended for him to be on the board. I don't know that that ever happened, and in any event, by the time the second RFP was issued, he was no longer on the board and no longer affiliated with YesCare in any way.
But the attorney that represents us in that litigation, where health care is at an issue, is sitting on the board of a competing bidder, and that company got the bid? It's almost like if we let this go without doing something, we're almost complicit in it.
Well, again, he was not.
And not even, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Not on the board. Excuse me, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Not on the board, but affiliated with the company that was the successful bidder I mean, I just don't see how, I don't see how the process would allow that to happen. And it also, I mean, I know it's held up. I mean, you know, I've recommended to be held up, but I would also recommend that we don't enter into this contract, especially considering the history of the Department of Corrections and everything that, I'll slow down. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. Although I would caution us, just considering how much money this is, the massive cloud, I mean, that's a massive problem, massive issue.
The committee does not have the power to cancel or alter the contract, but it did exercise its authority to delay it by 45 days. YesCare is scheduled to take over prison health care services on April 1st. Roberts said the department is confident that the company will be a good provider of quality health care for the state. Also on the subject of prisons, about 80 inmates were released with ankle monitors this week as the law passed in 2021 took effect. That law requires inmates to spend the final few months of their prison sentence on supervised release. The inmates would have been freed from prison anyway in the upcoming months when their sentences ended, but would not have had ankle monitors. Cam Ward, executive director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, said that about 400 total inmates are eligible to be released under the law. The Department of Corrections said that there will be a rolling release of the remaining eligible inmates as required victim notifications are carried out. The law was passed as a public safety measure with broad support in the legislature. However, it is coming under criticism this week from some lawmakers and Attorney General Steve Marshall, who unsuccessfully sued to block it from taking effect. Alabama is one of many states preparing for a future that will see more electric vehicles on the road. These aren't just the glorified golf carts of years ago, but the full-size sedans and even heavy-duty trucks. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott takes us for a ride.
Traffic is always moving, with cars, trucks, and SUVs having destinations to get to. Making it interesting are rising gas prices that can put a pinch in your wallet, unless you're like Michael Staley. He's the president of the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition.
The Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition is a nonprofit with a statewide footprint, and we work in the transportation space to help implement fuels that are alternatives to petroleum.
The ACFC is working on teaching people how to travel, but with newer types of vehicles hitting the roads.
So we work to educate and work with fleets, and now with electric vehicles, we're working with consumers and to educate people about the benefits of EVs and what it means for your pocketbook.
One of the biggest ideas in travel is electric vehicles, or EVs. Staley himself is driving this new full-size Ford pickup truck, which happens to be all electric.
My calculation for a pickup truck like this is that it costs me about 21 cents a mile to drive my gas truck. An electric truck, just for the gas, an electric truck would cost you 7 cents a mile if you charge it at home for the electricity. So you're talking about 1/3 of the fuel cost when you charge at home.
Staley says the list of locations is growing for EVs to plug in and get recharged, helping citizens save money.
Now, when you charge out at public places, it may be more expensive, but it's still going to amount to cost savings. You also don't have any transmissions to service. You don't have oil changes to get every 3 to 5,000 miles. So you're going to save money on the maintenance.
In this parking lot, about 80% of the vehicles around us are trucks or truck related. This one is different. It's a growing sign of the times in the state of Alabama because it's all electric, something that many people are hoping Alabamians take notice of.
There's no emissions from an electric vehicle. Electricity is also domestically produced, so we're not depending on any foreign sources to produce electricity here at home, and so it's a good, safe fuel with a very stable price, and that amounts to national and economic security.
Staley says part of the education about EVs includes alerting people about vehicle improvements.
In the past, people think of an EV as a short-range, very small car, and now that we have large vehicles that are electric, that are coming from the brands that people have known and trusted their whole life, like Ford and Chevy, and Teslas are great too. But now that we have this extensive range of vehicles to choose from, the electric space is not a trend. It's really a transition in the automotive industry.
An industry in the U.S. that has seen Alabama rank near the top in terms of producing vehicles.
As the automakers, especially in Alabama, we're the #4 auto exporting state in the country. Our automakers are investing. Our economy in our state is dependent on the automotive industry in a lot of ways. And so as our state is supporting a transition, consumers are adopting EVs at unprecedented rates, even here in Alabama.
Staley says the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition is making some progress, but he understands the road ahead may see some bumpy times before better times.
So everybody's situation is different. If you travel on the road 300 miles a day, an EV might not be for you, but for most people, for the type of driving that people do, you go home every night. And imagine having a gas station in your garage. If you drive an EV, you've got a fueling station right there at home, and so you can charge at work a lot of times for free.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Next, I'm joined by State Representative Danny Garrett, Chairman of the Education Ways and Means Committee in the House. Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, like Education Ways and Means, that means budget. You are the chairman of the House committee that deals with the education budget, the largest budget that we deal with. And there's been some good news on that front, a big surplus, somewhere in the range of 20% over last year, which, I mean, if you go back just decades, thinking about a surplus of that magnitude is pretty special. From your perspective as chairman, what does that mean? You're looking at maybe opportunities to divide up that money and do different things with it.
Well, I think it reflects several things. One, it reflects the enormous, a lot of COVID money that came in from the federal government, $60 billion plus that came into the state. And that money generated income taxes and sales taxes, all of which are earmarked to the Education Trust Fund. So that's part of the issue. The other is that for the past several years going into the COVID pandemic, the legislature was very conservative in how we budgeted. There's a formula that indicates what our cap can be in the budgets, how much we can spend. And the legislature determined that we would not spend to the cap for the past 2 years. And so what's happened is we held back on our spending. So a combination of receipts coming in from the federal government and also a discipline on not spending all the money meant we've created a surplus. We're not the only state to do that. In fact, most states have surpluses. Moody's did a stress test analytics recently, and in that stress test, looking at modeling a moderate recession based on our surplus and our rainy day funds, Alabama would be number 20 in terms of survivability or performance in a recession, which is kind of you're in the bell of the bell curve. So that means there are some states that have a lot of surplus. Florida, Texas, places like that have a lot of budget surplus. Other states, Georgia has a very slim surplus. Some states are close to being underwater, and in a recession would not fare so well. So I think we're in a good spot. We're not alone in having the surplus. Now the question is, what do we do with that surplus? There's a lot of talk about doing a tax rebate, which I think is something that we are going to talk about. The governor certainly indicated that she would like to do that, and a lot of support for that. We're beginning to hear some people kind of push back on that and say, well, why don't we redirect the money into some of these areas that are underperforming in the state? We'll have that discussion. My sense is we'll probably do a rebate of some size. Some people talk about permanent tax cuts, but when you look at the state of Alabama's taxes and you put them all together, we're very low on property taxes. We have higher sales tax rates. They're local sales tax rates primarily. You put all of it together, though, we are the lowest tax per capita in the country. So when you're trying to look at how we perform and compete against other states and the services we provide, you have to consider that. I think tax reform is something we should discuss. But actually, permanent tax cuts, we've got to be careful because we're dependent heavily, unlike most states, on income and sales tax. Most states are dependent more on property taxes, which tend to be very stable. Sales and income taxes fluctuate wildly. When the money's coming in, they go up. When the money's not there, they drop. So we're looking at all of that in a very disciplined approach, and I think that good news is we're in a good spot. I think we've managed fiscally responsible, but we're not the only state that has these surpluses. In fact, we have much less than many.
Well, it's like you said, so much of the surplus is COVID related, all this kind of trickling down, and so it's a temporary situation. When you enact a permanent tax cut, in a temporary situation, you could have some long-term consequences.
Right. And the question is that we don't really know where this is going. A year ago, we certainly did not foresee we would have a surplus like we have now, but we also, I think, thought the recession might be a lot worse. Although we have supply chain issues and we have a lot of inflation issues, the economy is still kind of pumping along right now. That's not going to go on forever. In fact, I think just this past month, for the first time, we had a reduction in the ETF receipts year over year. They weren't huge, but you didn't see that continuing upward trajectory. So at some point, that's going to stabilize. We just need to be prudent and responsible and make sure that we don't overcut.
I think back to more than a decade ago when those fluctuations in the ETF meant proration. Right. This is before the rolling reserve. Really, what led to the rolling reserve is, we're really plussing up this year. Then a recession comes and there's pink slips and things like that. Are you confident that we can avoid stuff like that because of the budget reform?
We can. When you look at our reserves and our rainy day funds, and you look at our budget discipline, I think we can certainly do that. One thing I will say too, a lot of states are having windfalls from the high property taxes right now. Everybody's property tax collections are up, but in Alabama, because we're number 50 in property tax collections per capita, and also number 49 in value that we assess per capita. So when you look at that, we're not benefiting from a huge windfall from property taxes. Some states have this huge windfall of property tax, so they can chip away or maybe give back on some of these more fluctuating taxes because those property taxes are not going to retract or regress like the others. So there's some nuances that we're looking at, but bottom line is we want to have fiscally responsible budgeting. We want to be a low tax state, continue to be a low tax state, and if we can do a rebate that would be meaningful, then I think we want to do
that. Let's talk about ARPA. We have the second round of American Rescue Plan Act funds, about $1.1 billion, I think. Senator Orr, your colleague in the Senate, kind of surprised me last week when he talked about these new rules and how it might kind of complicate things and maybe delay things. How soon do you think we might see a plan for how the state wants to go about spending the second round of money?
Well, I think we have to make those decisions sooner rather than later because there's an end date for when some of that money has to be spent. But part of the frustration has been getting the guidance from the federal Treasury group on what we can spend. Even in ARPA round 1, there's still a couple of things that we're bills that I'd worked on. We still don't have guidance or permission from the Treasury to do what we want to do. So I don't have an answer for when that will happen, but we're going to have to make some decisions sooner rather than later because we may be getting to a point where, because you have to spend these funds, a lot of them by the end of 2026, when you look at the lead times, we may have to say, you know what, we got to give up on this great idea and shift it to something we know we can accomplish. But those are discussions we're having on an ongoing basis.
That's interesting. Rules from the federal government. Usually it's unfunded mandates. This is a funded without the mandate almost. Right. Last round of ARPA funds, the governor called a special session at the very beginning to kind of isolate that issue. She did the same thing with infrastructure, gas tax. Talk about the virtue of that in terms of, all right, there's no other bills on the table. Maybe there's some a few things included in the call, but it really focuses the attention on that one issue. Is that a good tactic? Do you expect her to go about that the same way with this?
Yeah, I don't know what she would do. I personally like that, because normally a session is 30 days within a 105-day period, and a special session is 12 days within a 30-day period. But you're right, during that 12 days, you're only focused on what the governor's put in the call. So you can be much more efficient and much more, tactical in addressing a specific or limited number of issues. I think that would be a good suggestion. There's probably reasons to argue against that, but I think that it would be, something that would be the governor's decision, and I think would be a good approach, personally.
And also maybe avoid the horse trading that goes on, right? If you've got an ETF budget at the same time with the ARPA money going through, maybe you don't want that horse trading going on.
Well, the other thing too is that so you put that into a special session, that becomes is going to consume a number of days. But also, until you pass a budget, you've got to go through this BIR process, which slows down things dramatically. So it would delay the passing of budgets. It would delay some other legislation, which might be a good thing. Sometimes it's good not to bring legislation up, but I think we can be more efficient in a special dealing with those specific issues. I like that personally, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking, kind of a related issue is incentives. Y'all had this committee meeting yesterday about, I guess it kind of served as an update from Secretary Canfield about what the Alabama Jobs Act incentives have really, how they've performed, how it works, kind of maybe bringing lawmakers up to speed and all this. But look, this affects you because most of this comes from ETF, right? How was that received, and when do you think we're going to see an actual plan on what the renewal revisions of the incentive laws, when do you think we might see specifics on that?
So when you go back to the economic development incentives, we've been very successful in the state, and you look at all the number of manufacturers and the automobile, aerospace, other industries we've brought into the state, those have been very successful. But we do have, under these tax incentives, we have sunsets for each of these, and we also have accountability provisions now. And the particular meeting you're talking about was a joint committee where once a year we get, at least once a year, we get an update from Commerce on the Growing Alabama and the Jobs Act incentives. Both of those credits expire this year. They have to be renewed next year or this session, or they will expire. I think the expectation is that we will renew them. The question is, do we need to modify them in any regard? So we were getting an update from Secretary Canfield on how they performed, and they both have done quite well. But yeah, you're right. Now going into the next budget process, if we're talking about increasing any tax credit or any incentive, we have to balance that against what we think is going to happen in the budget as far as the revenue growth goes. Can't get crazy just because we have a surplus, because again, that's the kind of a one-time type thing. But I think the good news is that for all of these economic development incentives, there's some accountability provisions, there's sunset provisions, and we will continually be doing this on a routine basis, which is something that had not happened in the past.
Yeah, well, he talked about that, how it used to be more kind of borrowing money in cash,
right? Whereas
it seems a lot more. But he used the word sustainable.
Yeah, well, because most of these now are pay as you go. The state commits that we will give you an incentive if certain things happen, if you perform.
Create jobs.
If you create jobs, if you do the things you say you're going to do. And if you do that, then as you do that, you will earn that as you go, as opposed to getting it up front and then maybe or maybe not performing.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears real quick, the governor had some pretty ambitious goals laid out in her inaugural speech on the issue of education. Talking about, she wants to see the state rank in the 30s in reading and math, before the end of her term. That's an ambitious goal, especially when you consider we're not just competing with ourselves, we're competing against other states. That's a great goal. I like goals, but it's going to take work, obviously, from the legislature. How do you go about doing that? Is it doubling down on things like the Reading Initiative, the Literacy Act, the Numeracy Act? Are there going to be new programs? Where do we get started?
So I think what the governor said was she wanted to be number 30, which was a pretty specific number. Some people are still saying that we're number 42 or number 52 or number 49. Actually, the latest data that came out said we were number 40 and 39 in math and reading.
Mm-hmm.
That had to do as much with anything, with us not regressing when other states regressed during COVID, probably because we had more people in school in attendance. Now we'll see if that continues. But I think that what I'm encouraged about is that we seem to be taking a very tactical, strategic approach to education and fixing these problems. In the business world, you fix problems, you go to the problem, the root of the problem, you address that. What we've tended to do in the state is take pretty much our budget money and just divide it equally among all systems and all, and we never really target the root problems in some of these areas. We have some systems in the state that are wonderful, national models. We have some systems that are just very, very underserved and underperforming. And so I think you're seeing more of a focus with the Literacy Act and with numeracy and the accountability provisions built into those to focus on those areas that are not performing. We saw the governor put in budget last year her math corps. We're putting a lot of teachers into these underserved areas. The legislature added some auxiliary teachers into these underserved areas. So I think we're going to see a lot more focus into those areas where we really have the problems and trying to address that. And if you can move the needle just modestly in those areas, you'll see the state rankings go up tremendously. The other thing, there's school choice is something a lot of people are talking about. We're going to have those discussions. I think that as long as school choice can be a solution and an option to these problems, as long as there's a choice. So in some of the bills we've seen so far, we've seen choice for those people that may be in systems that are not languishing so poorly. We need to make sure that if we do those bills, that we're addressing the root of the problem. Because at the end of the day, we've got to provide public education. That's in our Constitution. That's the only thing we have to come down here in Montgomery to do is pass budgets. So it's something that's a responsibility we need to take very seriously. But I think it's more of a strategic, focused, and tactical approach into these areas that are underperforming. And we're seeing some progress. We've seen some good news come out of some of the conversion charter programs that are going on. We're not out of the woods yet. We don't have a lot of data yet. But I think you're going to see us do more things like that to try to address those areas that are really causing us to be so far behind. And let's just face it, we have a higher poverty rate than many states we're competing with. And that poverty tends to be, there's a swath of that. And if we can go to that area of the state and really make a difference, we're going to see the whole state perform much better nationally.
Well, someday we'll have you back on it and talk about possible budgeting reform. But while I have you, I wanted to switch gears real quick and talk about, you got a lot of new lawmakers, new members of the legislature. Y'all are having like mock sessions and things like that, getting prepared. What has been your take? You're meeting these new faces. They're getting on committees. You've got some new committee members. What's been your take? Are you optimistic about these new freshman lawmakers?
I'm really excited about them. They're young. Many of them are young. Some are as old as me, but they're new. They're energetic. They have a lot of good ideas. I think a lot of them think out of the box, and I think that's what we need right now. The world economy is changing. The state economy is changing. We have to be looking at and embracing new ideas that make sense, but also this class coming in, while they tend to appear to be innovative and thinking out of the box, they also, I think, adhere and uphold very much to the traditional values we have in the state. So I think that I'm excited about the contributions they'll make. We have a couple of new committee members I'm really excited about working with. And also we want to welcome Troy Stubbs and Brock Colvin to the committee as freshmen. And also Representative Kelvin Lawrence will be coming over from the general fund and on the Democratic side. And Representative Daniels, who's the minority leader, will also be in our committee. So we're excited about the energy and the composition of that committee, and I look forward to bright minds trying to solve some of these very difficult problems.
Well, and we'll look forward to budget hearings here in a couple of weeks. Representative, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back.
Montgomery native Percy L. Julian was an internationally acclaimed chemist, the third African American to receive a PhD in chemistry. He specialized in the chemistry of natural products and their synthesis in the laboratory. This technology is very important in medicines, food products, paints, and firefighting foams, among other things. Julian received many awards, including election to the National Academy of Sciences and the National Inventors Hall of Fame.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Robert Stewart, the newly elected state senator from Selma. Senator, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Todd, it's an honor to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. We're trying to introduce our audience to all the newly elected state lawmakers, and I think you're the first. So congratulations on your election to the Senate. We'll get into some of your election stuff later, but tell me first more about your background and why you decided to run for the Senate to begin with.
Well, Todd, I am a son of District 23. I was reared here, my whole education from pre-K all the way to 12th grade. The bones of my ancestors are in Dallas, Wilcox, and Lowndes County, and Perry County. And so it's just gratitude was the guiding force that caused me to run.
Mm. Well, it was a pretty high-profile election because you took on a pretty big name in Hank Sanders, of course.
And someone I respect.
Well, I mean, I don't know the number of years, but I mean, almost 40 years representing Selma. So no small feat, no small challenge to take it on, but to actually defeat him. How did you go about that? What was your strategy?
Well, I'm just grateful that we had buy-in. I view leadership differently because it's important to get the people to buy in into your agenda. Is one thing you have to evaluate, right? Like, who are you leading, right? And so you have to get people to buy into your agenda. And so I'm just grateful that that's what we had. We got our platform, Restoring Power to the People. It was a populist campaign and very focused on grassroots and public policy. Mm-hmm. Those were the two arms. And so we had a focus on people, economic development, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And those are kitchen table issues. In politics, there's lots of discussion about the meat and potatoes. And so that is what we were focused on, and just grateful that God spoke through the people.
Mm. Well, you say grassroots, and look, coming up in politics, yeah, that's the name of the game, but it's also a huge district, just geographically, maybe the biggest, I think. So that has to be a challenge. If you're knocking on doors and things like that, you've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yes. Well, I want to pay homage to all of our county chairs, right? We were very organized. We had chairs in every county. And while we didn't win every county, we were able to build inroads in each county. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is the reason why we were able to be successful.
Tell me more about your professional background. I know that we have something in common. We both worked for members of Congress. So I know you worked for Congresswoman Sewell.
Yes.
That's an interesting experience. Is that what partly led to your running on your own?
What I learned is that when you're working as a congressional staffer, you're working for the people. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't working for her, just working for the people and just trying to get an understanding of the issues that our communities face. And there's no greater way to impact the community is through state and local government. And so that was very important to me, is just understanding the understanding of government, having a stint in D.C. as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we are. And so I was able to parlay that into running for local office, and it worked out. You know, they looked at me as someone who was relatable, who came through the community, and there were just so many people who were important to me in my formative years mm-hmm. that helped with the campaign. And so I think that's very important.
Can't hurt to have a friend in Congress too. You know?
Can't help, you know, but she was hands off.
Right.
You know,
yeah,
she was very, you know, she didn't try to tip.
Well,
she was trying to be very fair.
Going forward.
Going forward, yes. You know, it's and she has a very strong knowledge. She's very smart. And so just the emphasis on public service. I think my family was very helpful. in forging a path ahead. A year ago, my grandmother died, and she was a nurse on Bloody Sunday. We buried her on 92 years old, and this is the day I had my first public interview a year ago.
How about that?
And so now I'm in the Senate, and so but she always told me I would be in politics, and so I'm just grateful for that.
Well, yeah, welcome to the show. Let's talk about that, because one thing that people might not realize is that unlike Congress or the president or most offices, in the legislature, once you get elected, you're serving right away. And so your service has already begun even before this legislative session. Talk about what it's been like. You had the organizational session. You've gotten to know your colleagues, voted on leadership and rules. What's this first couple of months been like?
Well, this is the honor of a lifetime. That is how I'm feeling. I wake up every day grateful. Everyone has been so helpful. I'm taken aback how helpful people are, regardless of party lines, regardless of where you're from in the state. Everyone has been so helpful. And, you know, we've been conditioned to believe in politics that there's a lot of rancor and division, but we have to take deep introspection and realize that we all want the same things for our communities. We want safe communities. We want our children to have a future, right? We want to be able to have health care. These are things like basic issues, and I think that we have to make sure that everyone has access to those.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw when you came in, I saw that Senator Allen was kind of walking you around. Have there been people like that, mentors that are kind of showing you around and teaching you the ropes a little bit?
Well, I just want to thank Senate leadership, right? Like Senator Reed, who's the pro tem of the Senate in the Jasper area, as well as Senator Bobby Singleton, the minority leader. They both have been helpful and poured into me a lot, and they've encouraged me to say, hey, this is what Alabama, this is what it means to serve your fellow Alabamians, and this is a great honor. And they've been very helpful. I thank Senator Reed for getting me really good, helping with good committee assignments, right? Because I'm at the point where I want to transition our campaign promises, right, our campaign platform, into tangible policy outcomes. And I think with the committee assignments that I received, I'll be able to do that.
What are those?
So there are a lot. And we're talking about standing committees and non-standing committees. So first of all, I'm on the budget, the general fund budget committee, budget and taxation committee, as well as I'm on the healthcare committee, healthcare, and then the healthcare youth committee. When we talk about healthcare, and in my district, there are only 2 counties out of the 8 that have pediatricians.
Really?
And so when we talk about, you know, this, I hope that this interview here is a clarion call to remind the whole state, and my colleagues in the House and the Senate, that we really need help. And if our state is going to be who we need, if we're going to reach our full potential, there needs to be opportunity in all parts of the state. And so when we talk about infrastructure, right, there's more than roads and bridges. It is broadband, lots of discussion about broadband, right? There's a huge need in my district when we talk about rural development. So I am on the Energy and Transportation Committee. I'm on the Broadband Oversight Committee, and I think that we're going to be able to make a lot of progress in tourism. I'm from Selma. I'm a son of Selma. And so tourism is a huge driver on economic development. And then when you talk about governmental affairs, I'm on the governmental affairs for the state. And so I want to ensure that there's opportunity in every corner of this state.
Well, let's talk about Selma. Devastating tornado came through there. Miraculously, no loss of life, but lots of damage just, you know, right downtown, just in the heart of Selma. Talk to me about how your observation of the damage. I know you toured it, and then maybe looking forward, what those needs are going to be down the road.
Well, first, I want to thank the governor and her staff for moving as swift as they did. I called the governor's office the minute after the storm had passed, and they moved very swiftly to declare a state of emergency. And I know that's unprecedented at times. And we were able to get federal help in swiftly through FEMA. They're on the ground now. The SBA, Small Business Association Administration, is on the ground helping providing access to loans and grants and much needed help that our people need in the district. I'm grateful for the American Red Cross. They were there on day one, providing relief, storm relief, and our civic organization, faith-based institutions. I'm just grateful that the outpour of support that we've received, and it will be a long yet persistent recovery, but I just want to encourage people to keep on supporting our region and the Selma area.
And it was announced, I guess, last week that the Jubilee will go on, and so that's obviously a big part of the. You mentioned tourism.
Tourism, yes.
And so I guess maybe some challenges in putting that event on, but it's going forward.
Yes. Well, I foresee there being opportunities for volunteerism efforts. There's a lot. Sometimes we have to pivot. There are times where we've had Jubilee during the pandemic, and navigating through the terrain of those hard times. But I foresee there being volunteerism opportunities for the Jubilee, and I'm excited. I look back at Jubilee with nostalgia because my uncle, he was a teenager and a foot soldier and protested during those times, and so just excited to honor our community and our impact that what we've had to make sure our democracy was realized.
Well, you mentioned it's going to be a long road, and reminding people of it, because sometimes that does happen. After the storm passes, after the photos kind of go away, the news moves on. And so do you think it will be important to remind your colleagues, to remind the state that, hey, we're going to need help in Selma to recover, not just now, but maybe for a year or more years to come? It
is essential. I invite my colleagues. A lot of my colleagues have come to Selma already, and so just encouraging them that this will be a long process. I know a lot of House leadership have come, and so as you already know, the governor has come to Selma twice. We've had Senator Katie Britt come as well, and so we're letting all the stakeholders know that it's important to have this support for these ongoing efforts. It's not a one and done, but Selma is just so important. We have people all over the country coming to Selma and to just honor the contributions that people from Alabama and the world have made in that small town. And so I'm just grateful. I'm excited. We have a blank canvas now. And so it's important that we encourage the citizens of Selma, that we get to decide our trajectory and where do we go from here. That was Dr. King's last book. Where do we go from here? And so that's where we are right now, and we have a bright future. I'm optimistic of that.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. Senator, again, congratulations. Welcome to the State House, and we'll want to have you back on sometime soon.
Thank you, Todd.
All right. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by Troy Stubbs, the newly elected state representative from Wetumpka. Mr. Stubbs, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Well, congratulations. Welcome to the State House and to the legislature. You've been, elected. And as I was talking about with Senator Stewart, once you're elected, you start serving. It's not like you got to wait to get sworn
That's
in.
right.
So you've been going already.
Absolutely.
Has been your impression so far of the legislature?
Well, it's been very welcoming. I look forward to serving with all of my fellow legislators and representing the people of District 31 in Elmore County. It's been an opportunity to learn a lot. I'm learning what I didn't know and trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible before the first session.
Mm-hmm. Could you share with us kind of more about your background, professional, political?
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina in my early years, moved around a lot growing up, which is one of the reasons that I am running for office and serving in this position, is because for me it's important to learn from where you live, and I've had many experiences doing that. My wife and I have been married for over 20 years. Her name is Jenny, and we have 4 children ranging from 21 years old to 10 years old. So 3 boys and 1 girl. So we're a very busy household. I graduated from the University of Alabama with a degree in finance and Russian, and have 2 master's degrees, one from the University of Louisville in sports administration and the other from Alabama State University in secondary mathematics. So I've done a lot in a short period of time in terms of careers. I've been in the financial industry, which I am now as a financial advisor at a local community bank in Wetumpka, but I've also been a college football coach. I have been an educator. I actually taught math at Wetumpka High School and was a high school football coach. So my background is diverse, which hopefully will prepare me well for opportunities to represent the people of District 31.
That's interesting. There are a lot of coaches getting into politics these days.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned kind of the reason behind you running. I wanted to ask you about that because people run for office for different reasons. I guess you had the incumbent was retiring, so maybe a lot of interest in an open seat. But what made you decide, yeah, I'm going to run for the state legislature?
Well, I'll back up a little bit. In 2015, in Wetumpka, my wife and I were looking around, raising children in that community, and we were wondering, what can we do to make this community better? We saw some things that we felt were missing, and my wife basically said, if you're going to complain about it, then you need to do something about it. And at that time, I chose to run against a 2-term incumbent county commissioner, and was elected by the people of District 3 and Elmore County Commission. And subsequently, on the first day that we were sworn in, I was elected by my peers to serve as the chairman of the county commission. So I was the chairman of the Elmore County Commission for 6 years, and during that time I learned a lot about our community, about the needs for our community, and I felt that this was the right time to take the information and the knowledge that I had gained in that political office to the State House.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there are several members of the legislature who were either county commissioners, city councilmen, mayors, some, and often hear about the value of that experience just at the super local level.
Absolutely. Really
informing statewide decisions. Because what you do at the legislature really affects those county commissions, right?
Absolutely, and the government closest to the people is the most effective government. And so as a state legislature, we need to make sure that we are informed and have great relationships with our city and county leaders, because they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are communicating with people regularly and having consistent county commission and city council meetings and addressing specific needs. And so the more we can do to empower them and to understand what they're facing, the better job we'll do as legislators.
Mm-hmm. So the regular session doesn't start for another month or so, but y'all have had the organizational, elected a speaker and everything, and the committees have been assigned. I want to see, what committees did you land on?
Well, I'm on 3 committees, all which I am very excited about. I'm on Ways and Means, Education, so the Education Budget Committee, also on Commerce and Small Business, and County and Municipal Government. So all 3 are areas that I feel like I can contribute immediately. Being a former educator and a certified math teacher in the state of Alabama, I have firsthand experience in the classroom. My wife and I owned a small business in Wetumpka for 7 years. And of course, serving as a county commissioner, I'm very familiar with county government.
Yeah. Well, those are some pretty good committees, especially for your very first term. I know lawmakers that have waited around multiple terms to be on the Education Budget Committee, so that's interesting. And you mentioned, I mean, because that's the committee that funds the range of education accounts, right, from pre-K all the way to higher ed, but also in some ways deals with policy. We've heard a lot about education from the governor and her state of the state, a lot of talk about school choice, a lot of talk about improving math scores, reading scores. From your perspective in the classroom, how can that translate? I mean, do we need to hear more from folks in the classroom about how to get those scores up and how to improve?
Well, I think there's always an opportunity to tap into resources that are available to us. We have a lot of data available to us. I think what we find in the state of Alabama is we're a very diverse state, from socioeconomic issues along with education and education background of leaders of communities. So the better job we do of trying to become familiar with what those teachers need specifically, and I think another part of it is we need to be supportive of our teachers. There are absolutely a lot of horrible things happening across the country, and we hear those and we see those things in the news about teachers and CRT and all of these different school board issues and those types of things. But you know, really, those are not pervasive in the state of Alabama. I'm sure they're happening, and there's always going to be instances that occur. But I think we need to be advocates for our teachers and the leaders of our schools. As parents, we need to be engaged and involved in what's going on, and we need to find ways to support the process. And as a legislator on the Education Budget Committee, I think it's important for us to recognize that we need to set some specific goals, and we need to always have in mind that we are preparing these children for the opportunities and challenges that they will face in the future. If that is our focus in everything that we do, then I think that we can be successful. There are some big issues that we're going to be tackling this session and future sessions. Education should always be a priority, and I'm excited that the governor made it such an important part of her address at the inauguration, and will continue to support her in advocacy for education in the state.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you were a math teacher, because you know last year they passed the Numeracy Act. So I wish you were around for that discussion, but I think there's going to be a lot more talk about it in terms of maybe allocating more resources and kind of, you know, punching that up a little bit. Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears a little bit to another policy area, and that's the judiciary, judges. Mary Sell reported this week on the reallocation of judgeships, because some circuits are really overwhelmed and maybe some circuits have an abundance of judges. I know that you come from a circuit that is a little bit overwhelmed. Talk to me about that and what needs to happen.
Yeah, the 19th Judicial Circuit, which I represent, at least partially, is Elmore, Autauga, and Chilton counties, and those are three counties that are fast-growing counties. We have a lot of opportunity in those areas for workforce development and other things, so a lot of people are coming to those communities. And with that, of course, there can be a strain on your judicial system, and the 19th Judicial Circuit currently has 3 circuit judges who are all great individuals and are working diligently to clear their dockets and to fulfill all of their responsibilities. But we continue with the data that we see. We're at least 1 circuit judge short in comparison with others with respect to the number of cases that the judges are expected to fulfill, etc. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I hope that as we work through this legislative session, if changes are made and if there is additional funding to add judges across the state of Alabama, I will absolutely advocate for an additional circuit judge in Elmore County, specifically the 19th Circuit, to make sure that we are serving the people of Elmore, Autauga, and Chilton County. So I know that will be an issue that we are prepared to address here in the legislative session, and I look forward to that discussion.
Mm-hmm. And it's controversial, right? Because you've got the Birmingham delegation that is often very powerful, especially in numbers, and they want to keep their judgeships. You know, they don't want to give them up. But you've got also up in Madison County in Huntsville, talk about fast growing. Mm-hmm. You know, they're experiencing the same issue. But this is the first time. This week is the first time I've heard about the 19th, right? Mm-hmm. The north of Montgomery being, you know, also being an issue. So that's going to be interesting because, all right, maybe it kind of sounds wonky, but it's, when you talk about a judicial circuit and these judges hearing cases, when there's a backlog of cases, that affects downstream, right? That affects your jails. That affects, the community safety in many ways.
Absolutely. And, I think that all legislators should advocate for their communities, for the districts that they represent. So I'm sure that there are other areas across the state that have some specific needs, but I hope that we can all come to the recognition, as you just stated, that this doesn't just impact the circuit judges that are sitting on the bench right now that maybe feel overworked. It affects the entire system. And so the better job we do of making sure that they are prepared and equipped to meet the needs of the judicial system in their respective circuits, the better quality of life the people will have in our districts and throughout the state.
Well, interesting topics that we'll be following going forward. We're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show. And congratulations again, and look forward to having you on again in the future.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate it, and look forward to the session and working with you and others.
Absolutely. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back next week at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.